This is the story of my second great-grandfather, Arthur George Courtney. And I'm calling this a deep research project because this is a story that goes back to 2006, really, which is when I first started researching George. And one of the questions I have today, is, I've been looking for George for so long. So will I ever find him, or is it a big black hole that I'm in and will never get out of? So the reality is that I don't have a neat ending for today's presentation. This presentation is really about the process, and I'm seeking advice on next steps or alternative avenues of research from people if they can give me any clues. It's not working. So as I said, George has been my nemesis since 2006. I started my DNA journey in 2010. And when I first started, this is what my tree looked like. I pretty much was confident about most of the people in my tree. I didn't know who my great-grandfather was on the paternal side, but and I never thought I would. My person of interest was this Arthur George Courtney here. And I had a theory about who he was and where he fitted in. I wasn't clear on his parents. So the problem that I had was that, firstly, what was his name? We had conflicting records. So is his name Arthur, George, or William? All we do know is that he was born about 1841 in Middlesex in England, and the key record I've got to work with is the 1871 census. All the other things are conflicting. Well, this one might be the conflict, I don't know. So this is the 1871 census record, and it's for Arthur George Courtney, and you can't read it very well here, but it says Arthur G. Courtney, labourer in a brass works, unemployed, from Marylebone, Middlesex. And it actually, for some years I thought this said 36, but it actually reads 30, not 36. So that's a little enumerator's mark there that makes it look like a 6. But all the other certificates that I have for his daughter's birth, his daughter's death, and the death of his wife all have different names: George William, George Arthur, Arthur George. Pretty consistent occupation. This one says silver and brass moulder. This one says civil engineer. This one says mechanical engineer. So some similarity there, but the names are completely different. But these are the only records that we actually have for George. And I call him George because Abigail Pace, his wife, Abigail Courtney here, the mother, calls him George, and that's why I call him George, because that's what she would have called him. So in 2010, when I did my DNA with Family Tree DNA, I had a theory about George, and there was only one George Courtney I could find that was missing in the 1871 census, and it was this guy here from Shoreham, Sussex. And this was my primary theory when I tested. I expected to get handed a big tick when I did my DNA test, but we all know that doesn't happen. So he was the only George I could find in all the censuses except for 1871. And one of the reasons he was my primary candidate was, well, he was born around the right time, and Abigail's sister, Abigail is George's wife, Harriet, had moved to this area between 61 and 71, and when she married James Titheridge. So, and it was only about a 5-minute walk away from George and his parents. So I was thinking that they were in the right time and place. And then James Titheridge's aunt, Sarah, was married to a guy named Richard Hinksman, and Abigail Pace, the wife of George, also has a second great-grandfather who was Thomas Hinksman. It's an unusual name, so I thought it was probably a hint about a family connection. But in over 15 years, we've got no autosomal matches to anyone from this family. So I started thinking, what could DNA tell me? And at that time, when I tested back in 2010, there weren't many matches. And in Australia, all we had to work with was Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch. We had very small matches, and I made limited progress. Ancestry DNA really only started in Australia in about 2015. And before that, when I was working with my FTD and GEDmatch results, my biggest match was 46 centimorgans. When I looked at it the other day, I realised it was over 12 segments, but the largest segment was only 16.3. So that's the sort of matches we were dealing with back then in terms of the limited pool. We have a lot more these days. But as you know, Ancestry DNA is really boomed, and you can see here the graph in Australia. It really took off in Australia, and it's great for building genetic networks, as Jim was saying a minute ago, and great for colonial Australian research. So if you've got ancestors who were here at the beginning when the colony was established, then you're doing a lot better in ancestry DNA for Australians. But by 2017, I still had not identified George, but I did get an unexpected discovery. I actually worked out through matching that my great-grandfather came from a Prussian line of Noel Whirling, and had this family had come to Australia in about 1850. But I still had nothing on George. I actually, the problem here was that I had a choice of three brothers, so the father of my grandmother could be one of three people. This guy here, Otto, we think is probably the most likely. My mother thought he was the best looking one, so I should pick him. We think it's Otto, but he was just living around the corner. The other two were a suburb or two away, but not, anything's possible. But I did discover that in 2017, so that was a great win, but George was still missing. So I just sort of tell you a little bit about ethnicity and family stories of Mum's family. And Mum was born in Australia, but her father was born in England, and he didn't arrive in Australia till 1910. And he's got these memoirs that he wrote in the 60s, that his father was of Welsh origin, and his name was Roberts, so we think that was the Roberts line. And his mother was predominantly English, which we think was Abigail Pace's line, and French with a touch of Irish. So is this a description of what we're looking for in the Courtney side of things? Her mother was a second generation Australian.
Hello, you got the.
What's happened
There you
there?
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Okay, so one of the fanciful stories I used to think, well, I used to think it was fanciful when Mum used to tell this story, that we were related to the Delanceys, and whenever you heard this song Manhattan on the radio or the TV or in the movie, there's nothing fancy about old Delancey Street, my grandfather used to say, "Oh, they're talking about your ancestors. That street was named after your ancestors." And one of the things that Mum had written down when I was very young, she had this little book that she wrote things down in. One of the Delanceys eloped with a girl who was forced into an arranged marriage and went to America. He was said to have been a royalist and fought on their side in the War of Independence. Now, it's sort of loosely aligned to what Stephen Delancey or his grandson James. It could be a conflation, we're not really sure. But it rang true when I didn't know anything about the Delanceys when I started, and I looked into this story about Delancey Street, and that's me there in 2011, in hope that I'll one day work out how we're related. But so is Stephen Delancey's family something I need to be thinking about? The French connection might fit in there. The other family story that's of interest that is related to this is the St. Helena story. In his memoirs, my grandfather said, "I asked my father if the ship could put in for a day at St. Helena so that we could see the tomb of." And on his notes, he's got about 5 different relationships written there, all crossed out. So he clearly didn't know by the 60s how exactly he was related to this person on St. Helena. And so I often wondered who this St. Helena person was. And when I looked into the Delanceys, it was very interesting that I found that Susan Delancey was the wife of Napoleon's jailer Hudson Lowe. Now, Susan Delancey had married a Johnson, before that. Mum was horrified that we might be related to Hudson Lowe because she was a big Napoleon fan. But anyway, Susan Delancey died in England, so it can't be her. But could there be some truth in this rumour? I've not been able to work it out, but that's just something that I thought was interesting. So I then decided I needed to be very systematic and apply the DNA methodology and start to document my findings, both on the traditional research front and also the genetic front, because people were saying to me, oh, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? And I couldn't remember. I'd have to go back and check my notes and say, yeah, I think I have. And, so I started to build a blog. The first thing I wanted to do was to validate my tree, and so work from the bottom up. But this is what I tell everyone in our DNA research group, that they need to be validating their pedigree from the bottom up, just like they do their paper research from a DNA point of view. And I did that, and I still came up with the same person that was missing at the second great-grandfather level. I'd researched every Courtney that was walking around Middlesex at that time. And through the DNA analysis, Mum had no significant unknown groups, no large matches. So I felt that DNA interrogation would lead me to the answer. So this is all the traditional research I documented on my blog, and tried to put in different posts there about everything I'd looked at, so that I can go back and reread it, and it refreshes my memory about what I did look at that time. From the traditional research point of view, I've still got all these George or Arthur Courtneys that were around Middlesex at that time that are possibly in contention. This guy, I've not been able to find anything about this Arthur Courtney, so he's around the right place. And where I've got a blog post, I've got the blog post linked in here, and I've been putting them all on Wikitree, because some of them I get to a dead end with my research, trying to develop their pedigrees to see if I can find anyone in there that's on my DNA clusters, and adding them to Wikitree, hoping that someone else will connect the dots for me in the meantime. But that hasn't worked. So my key testers are my mum and her 3 siblings, and I call them the Roberts-Murphy siblings. So if I say RMS, that's what I mean. And eventually I found out I had 5 paternal second cousins, siblings, and they're called the Roberts-Reedy siblings. And both of those groups I've been able to do visual phasing for, so that's been very helpful. But the question for me was, do we have enough DNA floating around, because a lot of the people didn't have any children. So George, this is George's tree. Here's George here, and this is his wife Abigail Pace. There's 2 Abigails, which makes it a bit confusing, so I try and say the wife or the daughter. Abigail Courtney, the daughter, and she had a sister Alberta. Now, they were twins, and they were in that 1871 census, 1 month old. I forgot to mention an important point. In that 1871 census, there was 3 daughters, Edith, and Edith's over here. Edith turned out to be a half-sister, and she's not descended from George, and we've proven that because I've proven her line back here. But in that other census, there was also a woman named Anne Muggeridge, who was present as a nurse, and it said visitor. And she was born in the same place as Arthur George, so we don't know her relationship at this stage. And George's daughter had, and that's Abigail Courtney, had 2 sons, Ted and Jimmy. And she had a daughter as well, but Elsie died young, so there's nothing there. And Ted, which is my mother's father, my grandfather, had 7 children, and we've got 4 tested, and 3 females would have handed down XDNA. But Jimmy only had sons, and we don't have any XDNA over there. So all we've got is autosomal and including XDNA to look at. So the key DNA tests that I work with are the top of the tree type people. So these 4 siblings, which are mum and her 3 siblings, 2 children of my aunt who's deceased, and the 5 Roberts Reedy siblings down here. And for inferring segments, I use these kits here. I've also been able to create Lazarus kits for Brian and Ted at GEDmatch, and I find them useful because the segments are consolidated at a higher level. Sometimes you get a longer segment match, which might pick up more matches for you at GEDmatch that you'll get on the individuals alone. So have we got enough DNA? I went to the coverage estimator at DNA Painter and had a look at how much DNA we had for Abigail Courtney. Now this is mum's paternal grandmother and also the daughter of George. And as you can see there, GEDmatch thinks we've got 60% of her DNA, which isn't a bad number. And when you look at George, only 30%, because of course we lose half each generation. Sorry. And so when you look at what I've got for Brian's Lazarus kits, who's the father of these siblings, we've got 96% of his DNA, which is a good number, and my grandfather, 96% of his DNA. And we've only got 48 of Jimmy because it's all coming through one son. The other 2 sons had no children. So these 5 siblings are helping me get Brian's DNA, but it's not helping so much on James, and he'll share a lot of the same segments with Edward. So that's where we're getting the 30% of George. So is that enough? The great thing about the DNA Painter tool is it suggests other testers that might be in your tree that you can test. I've tested everyone that moves virtually, but it did come up with this suggestion of Alberta Courtney, which is the other twin. So Abigail Courtney had a twin sister in that 1871 census, Alberta. Now, I've not been able to find her anywhere after that point, so I've assumed she died as an infant, but in the 1881 census, both Abigail, George and Alberta are all missing, so they could be somewhere else, I don't know. But we've never sort of resolved that. So DNA Painter's suggesting that I could get up to 47.7% of George's DNA if I tested Alberta, but clearly she was born in 1871, so I wouldn't be testing a child. I'd probably be testing a great-grandchild or something, so that number would be a lot lower than that. But it's a good tool to give you clues about who you might test next. And of course, we all know from Jim's porcupine chart that, the further we go out, then the less DNA is going to be there from those ancestors. And in fact, I might not have any DNA from this ancestor. So who knows? And because Mum's born in 1930, we're likely to be, current testers are going to be several times removed. So the amount of shared DNA is getting smaller and smaller. So we're looking for third cousins or greater. And because of that, we're going to be out in the extremities here in the low-level matches of who we might be matching with and trying to fit them in our tree. And they don't sort of fluff up to the surface as easily as our closer relatives do. So I decided I needed to be methodical and very systematic about applying the DNA research methodology. So I checked my tree and therefore I decided to work into grouping and looking at triangulated groups as well. And so I sorting our matches into 20 centimorgan groups, shared match groups. And remember, at this time, we didn't have that much at Ancestry DNA. I actually didn't even, a lot of the matches were less than that. And to sort chromosome groups as well, over 15. But that was just a rule of thumb. I'd go much lower if I thought I was interested in somebody. But with both methods, looking at tree triangulation to try and identify clusters in ancestry, and also triangulated groups at the chromosome sites. And by working through this process, you should be able to confirm your pedigree into known family lines, which I was able to, but I wasn't able to identify any significant groups of unknown matches, and I was aiming to try and identify through triangulated groups segments inherited from the target ancestor. So what happened in 2016 was visual phasing came along, and I was able to use mum's data to try and identify those grandparent segments. But still, we still had low testing numbers, so we weren't getting significant numbers of matches. And so I did the visual phasing, and this was in PowerPoint, I think, at the time. And basically these are the segments that are shared between mum and her siblings, and the siblings with each other. And down here is using the logic puzzle from up the top here, working out what segment came from which of the four grandparents. And so the blue ones here are the Abigail Courtney segments, and this is Abigail, we believe, around 1881 in England at school. And so this gave me a starting point for interrogating segments, for looking for clues for her ancestors, in particular George. What's going on? Why is that going backwards? And in 2018, had a bit of a breakthrough, and this is the woman I forgot to mention. I matched with these two cousins, or mum and her siblings matched with these two first cousins, Sharon and John, and their ancestor was this Anne Muggeridge. Her name was actually Anne Webster. And so at this point in 2018, I was thinking, oh, okay, so this person is a relation somehow, maybe. And at that time, we didn't know whether it was a relation on Abigail Pace's side, the wife, or whether it was a relation to George. I've subsequently worked out through segment analysis that it is actually the Courtney side. So you can see there that we've got reasonable segment matches there on two chromosomes for Sharon, and on John's side also two chromosomes, one on the chromosome 5 and one on chromosome 23. So that was good, and Anne Webster fits in nicely into his both their John's X path. So it could be a clue that Anne is related to us somehow on this line. So by 2019, I was still wandering around trying to work out things, and I definitely determined that Anne Launden and Abigail Pace were clearly my ancestors, and I had lots of matches going back to subsequent generations on those two lines. But I was starting to think this guy here, Edward Roberts, was also a problem, and because I only had one match for him on going back on his line, and it was like an eighth cousin or something, 7 centimorgans. And I was always, very skeptical about it. And so I started to think I had two problem great-grandfathers here, Arthur, George, and Edward. And what was I going to say? Yeah. And so in terms of all of this, the family emigrated in 1910 from England, so these are both on that paternal side, and all our matches seem to be in the US or Australia. There weren't very many English matches at all, and I think that there has been a slow take up in England, and I think we're getting a few more matches, but they seem to be a lot lower than a lot of the other countries, particularly the US and Australia, very avid testers. And the other issue I had was that my primary candidate, the fellow I spoke to you about earlier, he had married 3 times and had no children. So he's got no DNA floating around in the current day, we don't think. And so that could also be a problem. So why I haven't been able to match, because we haven't got significant numbers of descendants either. Oops, sorry. Am I going the right way? No, I've gone backwards. It's going backwards. Why is it going backwards? Here we go. Okay, so by 2020, clustering had come in, and I was trying new techniques. And as we all know, in those days we were starting off with our more than 20 centimorgans, which was close relations, and trying to build shared match groups and looking for tree triangulation. And around that time, Dana Leeds brought out the Leeds method, and Jim brought back his walking back the clusters process. And I decided to try both of those to see what I could glean from clustering. And around then, you can see Mum's ethnicity is not very interesting. 50% England, 50% Ireland doesn't help me very much. And at that time, she had 302 fourth cousins or closer. So they were the greater than 20 centimorgans at that time. And I'd worked out where 86 of them had fitted in at that point, which is a low number based on a lot of the American people that I've spoken to about numbers that you were getting at that time. I think in the US, a lot of people had over 1,000 there and it just stuck on 1,000 as fourth cousins or closer. And when I looked at my own DNA matches, I had fitted in 241 people into my tree, but I had sort of similar fourth cousins or closer to Mum. So you can see that our matches are a lot lower, and mine, my 71 were maternal, so matching with Mum's side, and 170 paternal. And the reason I think paternal was so high compared to the maternal is that on my paternal side, I had early South Australian ancestors that came out around 1830. So ancestry is very good for people with Australian colonial ancestry. And when I did the Leeds method, the manual process, I came up with some unknown groups, and one of those was this Rudd-Webster group. And you'll recall that John and Sharon only tested at 23andMe. They're not on Ancestry. And so this was pleasing to see a few more matches on this Rudd-Webster line that I thought, okay, this might be something. But there were others there that I didn't know. But there are only small numbers in these unknown groups here that I wasn't sure about. What does this say? Yeah. And in terms of her closest matches, these are the third cousins that she had in 2020, and there's only 7 of them, and they're all maternal, or mostly on these Irish lines, mostly Cassidy's and one Murphy. So that wasn't very helpful. And so then I did Jim's process, walking back the clusters, and we were in COVID by this, so I was locked up doing all these things, and eventually I did a presentation at the Society of Australian Genealogists back in May 2020 about my findings, but Jim's process was very useful. Sorry, my phone's ringing. Turn it off. Okay, so we're looking for matches to the second great grandparents. So the parents would be second great grandparents for Mum, so my third great grandparents. So the DNA matches are likely to be back more generations beyond the third cousin level. So when I did the first cluster report for under Jim's process at 40 centimorgans, 40 to 400 it was, I came up with 9 groups, which wasn't very many, and all of these were maternal, 5 maternal, and 4 that were possibly unknown, because at this stage we didn't have side view, so we didn't know what side they were on, and so I had sort of thought, oh, well, maybe they're paternal, but they weren't very useful because they're only matching one other person, and this pink group, number 9, that's a pair of siblings, so they weren't very helpful. So I went down to 20 centimorgans, where I ended up with 71 clusters, 36 maternal, and 12 paternal, and then 23 unknown. So I wanted to analyse these groups a bit more, particularly the paternal and these unknown groups, to see if I could work out anything. And from most of these paternal ones, I was able to work out what line they were on, mainly from my visual phasing, being able to identify a person in the cluster that I knew about from another site with chromosome data. But most of them didn't have much. So for the next year or so, I focused on these clusters, these 71 clusters, and I got down to 21 focus clusters pretty quickly that I wanted to look at, where 15 of them where the paternal line was unclear, and which side it was on, whether it was a Roberts match or a Courtney match, and 6 where I didn't know whether they were maternal or paternal. And by 2021, I'd got it down to 11 clusters that I wanted to work on, 3 where I still didn't know which side they were, paternal, which Roberts or Courtney. And these ones I knew were Courtney pace, but I didn't know whether they were Courtney or pace segments. And these ones I didn't know whether they were maternal or paternal. So 11. So continued to work on these quite some time, and decided that 2021 was going to be my year that I was going to break through on the paternal line. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, but that's what I set out to do, because I had this one match on this Edward Roberts line, and I still had no matches on Arthur George Courtney's line. But I had become much more rigorous on my grouping and using the Arn and Tafel numbers. I think I got that from Jim, and trying to be systematic about mapping those in Ancestry. We only had a limited number of dots then, so it was not as easy. I had to keep rechanging them for what I wanted to look at. And just as a bit of an aside, these numbers are as they relate to me. I found it easier to do that, so that I could manage my kit and this kit, mum's kits, in the same sort of numbers, so I didn't have to keep rethinking about it. So I use my kit for my paternal side, and I don't even look at the maternal matches hardly, and then mum's kit for her maternal side, but allocate them to my Arn and Tafel groups. And through that process, I came up with all these hanging branches and shared ancestors within the clusters. These ones I didn't know what side they were on. These ones I thought they were going to be on the Edward Roberts or Laundon side. And these ones I thought were Courtney or Pace clusters. And here we have this cluster 46 was another one relating to this Anne Webster, who I believe is who was in the 1871 census. So she's got to fit into the tree somewhere. And these ones I thought were also on that line, perhaps. So from there, I continued to try and walk back the clusters at Ancestry DNA and identify the key matches in those clusters with the segment data, and to use the paternal segments from the visual phasing process to actually give me more clues, and to keep going back and forth between the two to actually build on what you know from the different views. In 2022, I also discovered that I had 5 second cousins, not 2. So in the beginning, in 2018, I thought I only had 2 people on this line. And then I found out there were all these other siblings. So I got all these siblings tested at Ancestry. And lo and behold, we broke through on the Roberts line. It turned out that this cluster in the middle here, this Hodson-Fox cluster, one of the siblings had a very high match, 103, whereas mum had 24 or something. And I was able to use that particular match and do a lot of research to find out how they only had a very limited tree, but they eventually hooked back to this couple here. So that was really good. So I was able to actually use Jim's stuff to identify this, and it was the walk back process for Jim's that's actually led to that discovery. We also we determined that by this stage, that this group was a Courtney group, And side view came along sometime, and we were able to work out that this one was paternal, but these three are still unassigned, so who knows how they fit in. So from that process, I determined that Edward Roberts wasn't Edward Roberts at all, but really this fellow by the name of Edmund Dye. And that's really good. And my blog. So that breakthrough was due to walking back the clusters and combined with chromosome analysis. And I'm still looking for a Y-DNA tester to double check that is correct, because we've done the big Y. I've got 2 testers who've done the big Y, and we don't have any. We have one match that is quite a way away. So I'd really like to confirm that with Y-DNA testing. So after that, I decided I needed to be digging deeper and identifying the segments inherited from Abigail Courtney. And I had the 2 sets of visual phasing by now of the Roberts-Murphy siblings and the Roberts-Reedy siblings. And I did a big process on phased and inferred segments and developed the Lazarus kits, as I mentioned before. So on my blog, I've documented how I'm going to establish the DNA of George Courtney, which has got to do with getting Abigail's segments, then determining the groups that came from her mother and eliminating those, and trying to reconstruct her genome as well. And I've got a reconstruction workflow, which is a 14-step process, which I kept forgetting what step I was up to. So that's why I documented that. So that's all on my blog. And we identified the Courtney segments, as I mentioned earlier. I also use phased and evil twin kits to help firm up the recombination point. If you've done visual phasing and you've got any phased and evil twin kits, they're very useful in getting clarity around some of those reconfirmation points, because phase kits only have one side, not 2 sides. So here we have Mum and her sister Margaret share this segment here of Courtney Cassidy, but my evil twin only shares one side, and we were able to work out that the Courtney only goes to here for the evil twin, and Cassidy starts here. Same thing with the phase paternal, it's the opposite. So the phase maternal kit is the Courtney part is here. So it's very good for lining up your segment points. And then I started to map all the inferred segments in a spreadsheet. So I ended up with these 3 sets of data that I was constantly looking at, trying to work out where a match might fit in and who they matched, if they matched my cousin or myself on particular segment areas, so that I could allocate the line. I had to go at mapping it all in DNA Painter, but I found this very confusing. It just a mass of information, and it didn't really help me much. It looks nice. So finally, last year, I think it was, I decided that I would redo all my chromosome visual phasing summaries by chromosome and combine all the information in a linear form. So I've gone across here with all my kits, so that I could, if I got a match in this area here, say, I could see who was matching, who was a George Courtney segment, who was a Cassidy segment, and who should be matching who. But it was a lot of work taking this data and then converting it here. So these are the 4 siblings. So I started with the visual phasing data and plotted their paternal and maternal sides, and then added in the phase kits. And so this is me, and this is my son here. And so by looking at where we were matching other people, I was able to determine what I got from Mum and what I didn't get from Mum. And this was a good checking mechanism to make sure that Mum's segments were all correct. And I did find some errors along the way and fix those up. Looking at it all in one line really helped. I did the same thing for my cousin, who's also got a phased and evil twin kit. another checking mechanism. And then the two siblings that come down from mum's sister Mary, who's deceased, unfortunately, and looking at where they match. And the second cousins, I've only got segment data for 4 of the 5 of them, but that was very useful. And going through their segment data and looking at how they match my family, and then determining what segments they got. So these ones are all in common with my family. These ones are not in common, but they are coming down the Roberts line. So they're additional clues to pursue for looking for George. And even though we're not looking for the maternal side as part of this process, I did map mum's first cousin, who should have segments from the same grandparents, and a first cousin once removed, who of course may only get some segments from them. So that's been useful for ongoing analysis. And in the end, I came up with paternal segments here. So this is what should be in Lazarus, paternal and maternal from my mum's brother Ted, and then Brian, who's the father of the 5 siblings. And so that gave us more information, which I was able to map into DNA Painter. And same thing for the first cousins. And so what is good about this is that I've now consolidated what segments all come through for that particular grandparent. And I can see here, these are all the Courtney Pace segments. And I'm trying to identify all the George segments. And you can see here that nobody inherited anything here. So when I get a map, when I'm looking for these Courtney segments, I can know who to interrogate. So you can see here, mum's got the longest blue line. So she's got more segments in that particular chromosome than anyone else. So I'd start with her and look at all the triangulated groups here. These have got a little bit more. And over here, we don't really know what the Roberts-Reedy siblings got in this section. So it could be a Courtney segment that's worth exploring. So it's giving me a heads up on which kit to look at when I start to look at the triangulated groups. Oops, gone the wrong way again, sorry. And then mapping it on DNA Painter. And so you can see here that all these blue ones are likely Courtney segments for George. So you can see them here coming through. And these are the ones I've yet to explore or yet to separate. What I'm trying to do is pull out all the Pace segments. So all of these belong to Abigail's mother, Abigail Pace. And so they're not of interest. So I'm just trying to isolate the Courtney ones. And you can see here, I'm trying to map the Courtney Pace segments here. So these yellow ones where I haven't split them between Courtney and Pace. I can see here who's matching on that particular triangulated group and try to work out whether they're Courtney or Pace ones. Chromosome 22 is a real headache because I still haven't worked out 10 years on which side these people are matching on. So which paternal side, P1 or P2, whether they're a Roberts segment or a Courtney segment. We know it's not a Pace segment, so we've narrowed it down to three potential grandparents because the Roberts-Reedy siblings have got Pace matches down here. So we know this one's not a Pace segment, but other than that, still trying to work out each side. So a lot of this is a very long-term process. So back to genetic groups and clusters. So the outcome of all of this has been that I've identified 2 key Courtney groups. Now the first one is the Gypsies, very common names of Williams and Taylor in Middlesex. And I believe we connect to this group somewhere back from 1892. We've got very large matches at the X and the autosomal level. And then there's the Websters, which is this Anne Muggeridge who was in the 1871 census. They're clearly another group that belongs to the Courtneys. By 2026, I've got a lot more data in Ancestry. We've now got lots of dots, which I've used, all 64. We've now got 152 people in this Courtney group, which is coming from shared matches of people I suspect are on the Courtney line. I've tried to identify various hanging branches and identified them here as having separate groups so that I can see the interrelationships between them if they're in more than one group. And I've only got 2 on the William. Most of them are Websters. There's this Anthony Freeland line. I don't know how they fit in. Most of them are Websters, but the Gypsy lines, I've only got 2 groups, small in number of testers, but some large matches in there, which is interesting. And what I'm doing on my blog is working through all these genetic groups, and in particular trying to document all the triangulated groups that I've got and what couple is coming up in each of these triangulated groups. And you can see there that there's lots of Taylor-Williams or Williams-Taylor and quite a few Rudd-Websters as well. So they're coming out in the triangulated groups as well as the ancestry clusters. And I'm still trying to document some of the Courtney Pace groups here as well. And just highlighting the names so that I can remember where I saw that last time without having to dig through lots of match lists and spreadsheets and things. Okay, all right. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the X factor. And as we know, it has a unique inheritance path, and it helps to limit the number of ancestors where you can match a particular person. And of course, Mum and her female siblings get a paternal segment from their father. Because he doesn't recombine that segment, it's actually a full segment that came from his mother. Is that right? Was it? Yes. Mum and Margaret there on the first 2 lines have got a full paternal segment, which is from Abigail Courtney. And my cousin has also got a very large segment there as well. So all of these other ones are irrelevant. So we only get DNA from 3 grandparent groups, not the Roberts line. So this was very handy for my X analysis. And I've mapped that at DNA Painter. And the reason I wanted to talk about the X was that we have this 96 centimorgan X match on GEDmatch, Christine. And when you look at Christine's tree, she's inherited, I believe, you just have to trust me on this, that it goes back to this Ada Williams, 1892, because, and that's not just from the X match, I've determined that, it's from a whole lot of other autosomal matches, that everyone goes back to this woman. So I've assumed the X does too, and that she would have got it from her father, who because he doesn't recombine his segment is exactly what Ada would have had. So Ada's segment came from these 2 people, John Williams or Esther Taylor. And I haven't been able to find much out about John Williams and Esther Taylor, but these are the Gypsy groups that are potentially Romany ancestors of Ada. And we have 2 separate segments, and you can see here that they're quite long on the first segment there, 62 centimorgans, and these ones 33 centimorgans. And so that was quite exciting. I have tried to look into, I've got several people who triangulate on that segment at GEDmatch. I haven't been able to find any tree triangulation yet, although they do seem to have a lot of French ancestry in there. So could George be of Romany descent? I don't know, but it's a big clue that that 92 centimorgan match is going back on those Romany lines that he may well have. And And around this time, I was given this photo by one of my newly found second cousins of who they believe was Abigail Courtney. Here, this is clearly Edward Roberts, and they believe this is Howard, the first son of Jimmy, and this is his mother, Abigail. And now she's got a very olive complexion. So perhaps there is some truth in this. And this is Mum and Mary in about 1950. They always had good olive skin as well. And funnily enough, when anyone had a tan in our family, Mary used to say a touch of the tinker. So clearly the gypsy stories were always loved by my mother and Mary. They often Mum used to read the tea leaves, and also, whenever there was a Stuart Granger movie on Caravan, we had to watch it. But was the gypsies talked about in their youth? I don't know. I always just thought it was a fanciful thing. They liked the idea of it. But anyway, there could be some truth in it. So this is the X chromosome for mum, and these are the segments we believe are coming through from the Williams-Taylor group, the gypsy group. There seems to be about 3 little subgroups in there, so this could be a longer segment coming from 3 people further back or not. Abigail Pace segments are here. We've got more George Courtney segments here. And this is the John segment I mentioned earlier, the fellow from 23andMe, Sharon and John. And his X segment is adjacent to this William Taylor's segment. So is it a recombination of these 2 different ancestors, or are they all the same? And it's just a matter of, an end point. So I suspect all this is a Courtney Pace. We've got a triangulated group here that probably fits in here and is a Pace segment, not confirmed, but probable. And the only gap really we have on the X chromosome is this part here. I haven't been able to find, there's very few matches in that particular area. So when I can't remember where I got this from. I think it was from 23andMe, but I can't remember. But this sort of shows the probability for the X chromosome being handed down. And here we have George, and you can see there that's his full segment, goes down to here to Abigail. Edward Roberts gets this amount, and down here. So it looks like Mum could inherit roughly 50% of her X could come from George. And when you look at Christine, the match, her ancestor line is pretty similar. It goes a male, female, male. So she would have the same sort of thing happening. So roughly 50% of her X chromosome could be from John Williams, or it could also be from Esther Taylor, but just with an unusual amount. So is John Williams more likely to be where we're getting that segment from compared to Esther Taylor? Possibly, but nothing's definitive. So one thing I decided, I suddenly had a brainwave last week while while preparing this, that I should compare the 2 first cousins at GEDmatch. We only have 2 first cousins, only 2 people from the Williams-Taylor group are actually on GEDmatch, and it's these 2 and their first cousins. And Pam, we have 52 centimorgans. Christine, we only have 25 centimorgans autosomal, but we've got this great big X match. So if we assume that all of this is coming from Ada Williams, and that on the X match, I also looked at what Pam and Christine shared, and they share this very large segment in the centre here. So it would be, because Christina gets her X from her father, it would only be a mix of John Williams or Esther Taylor's segments in that location. So could it be that we are one of those and they are the other, that Pam is matching her on the other, and these are the 2 recombination points for Christine's segment? Unclear, but it could be that we are the opposite of whatever they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I started to think about where this match might fit in, and this is from DNA Painter, and trying to work out what the matches are telling us. And these are the matches that I've got through other people that all connect back to this Ada Williams. And so is George's mother also an ancestor or the mother of John or Esther? And DNA Painter's suggesting that it's 90% chance it's a full sibling, 10% half sibling. But the matches down here aren't very big, so that may be a bit misleading. When I look at Esther, whether it could be Esther, well, she's actually born in 1858. Now, this John Williams, we don't really know when he was born. He's not in any census records. And so just based on the birth of the child, he could be before 1870. But there is one of Ada's siblings was born in the workhouse, and there is a John Williams at the workhouse at that time who was born in 1822. So is that him? It seems like a big gap. I don't really know. So I need to know more about this John Williams to be able to determine whether the one in the workhouse is the father. But he was born in 1822, if it is him. But so she can't be, Esther can't be George's mother, I don't believe, because of that. Or sibling, I should say, sibling. And it's more likely to be back another level if it's on the Taylor line. So I've blogged about these two things. This is back in 2024 and 2023. And the article about John Williams, because I don't know anything about him really, was published in Romany Roots, which was is a Romany family history society. So where do the Websters fit in? We already know that she's in the 1871 census and we've got matches to her. She fits on the X line. So what's the relationship of Anne? Is she a mother, an aunt, a sibling, or a cousin? Very unclear. Here's John's match that we talked about at 23andMe. And the trouble is all these people are on different sites and I can't compare them to each other. But if we just assume that it's correct, this guy over here is on MyHeritage. He shares 67. He's another generation down. But he goes through the Muggeridge line and John goes through the Rudd line. But they all go back to this Anne Webster. So I've eliminated the husbands from our theory and I'm focusing on the Websters. So this match is very high. When you look at it at MyHeritage, it might be being affected by imputation because it's just mainly on that segment 3. Not sure. Now, collaboration at Ancestry is really the way to go. But I've only got one person who's agreed to collaborate with me so far, Rebecca. And she's descended on this Muggeridge line through the Rudd-Webster line as well, same as John. And when I look at her through Mum's kit at Ancestry, I've only got 13 shared matches and 4 known testers that I tested. But if you go to looking through Rebecca's match, I was able to identify 60 matches in there that match my family, that are on the lower level, that don't get picked up through the shared match process. And so I was able to find a whole lot of people on the Muggeridge Western line in her results to work on that line, and also found this Rossiter Wadman group, which I already knew about in Mum's matches as a hanging branch. But that clearly gave me the clue that our connection to Rebecca was definitely on this side, and also this couple is further out on that Anne's line. And I also found 2 unknown groups. I actually knew about this Ishmael Grimes group from Jim's process, but this Appleby group was a new one that Rebecca had all these matches that I recognised, and they all go back to this Appleby line. So that fits in somehow as well, but I'm not sure how. So collaborating gave me more shared matches than I could get through enhanced shared matching through our own kits. So I'm desperately writing to people trying to get more collaboration, but I don't seem to get anywhere. And the Ishmael Grimes group is a really big group, and a bit like the one Jim was talking about. There's a lot of double DNA, I call it, where these people have got lines that go back on two different pathways to these guys. So that could be inflating what I've got here, but this is an old image. There's a lot more people on there now. And this group, there's a lot of close marrying between this Ishmael and Chrisman families. So these have got it appears to be isolated to the USA. I've got no one really I've identified back further than that. Interestingly, I found these articles about these people, and it was the family was used to argue for sterilisation laws back in the 1800s. So clearly lots of descendants, which is contributing to that super huge group. So my working hypothesis is that the X match is actually maternal. So could John Williams and George share a Webster mother? Are the X segments from this Webster Renison line? So here's Ada down here, John Williams. Is Anne Webster, or a sister of Anne Webster, John's mother? He can only get his X from a female, so it has to be female. And then if that's the case, it could be coming back through this line here, either James Webster or Elizabeth Renison. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got these X matches. So this could be one whole ancestor or two. And here's this Rossiter Wadman line that we have, as well as Rebecca, and so that goes back on that line as well. But where do these other lines fit? I don't know. So this is my speculative connection at the moment. His mother is possibly a Webster, but if both of those segments, the one from John who was on 23andMe and also Christine, are on this side, that means I still don't know where the father fits in. And I don't have any other large groups. So who is the father? Could John Williams and George be full or half siblings? And where does the Courtney name come from? Is it somewhere back here? Very unclear. So am I in for a big surprise? Don't know. So what next? I need to recruit more testers and collaborators and continue to work on the Courtney segments. I also want to analyse the Williams-Taylor segments and reconstruct Abigail's genome, but I need 1,500 centimorgans to be able to get a Lazarus kit. And I'm doing some work through Ball and Genetics to try and develop that. Great news, a couple of days ago, I got someone to agree to test who's on this line so that I can actually get an ancestry test to monitor and work through. So we're waiting for the test it hasn't reached England yet, but then hopefully this fellow will test. He's a bit he's a generation down from all the key matches where I've got a very large matches, but hopefully he'll at least match these people, and we'll be able to I can do the genealogy on this side to try and find out without anyone being a collaborator at the moment. Hopefully that will help me sort out this question here. He may be too distant, but hopefully something will be revealed from that. And I'm continuing my work on the walking back the segments. So you can see here that through that process, I've identified 231 triangulated groups, and I've only got that chromosome 22 to go to find out. There'll be 2 of these will be Courtney segments, but which ones? And I'm working on identifying the 126 Courtney Pace ones. I'm down to 69. There's 378 Courtney paste matches at Ancestry that I continue to work through that will help me untangle these. And I've now got 29 triangulated groups for George. And you can see here that 15 of those are Williams Taylors. We've only got a few people at Ancestry on the Williams Taylor line, but 15 of the triangulated groups are coming back from that line, 8 on the Websters and 6 I'm not quite sure about. So trying to work on these 187 potential matches in clusters to see whether they fit into any of these triangulated groups or can give me clues on new ones. And I've mapped the first cousins, Christine and Pam. I mentioned earlier about the X chromosome, and they've got all these matches in common. So I'm also doing some research on them and trying to identify other matches that they might have that might help to solve this question about whether the Courtneys are the opposite to whatever she's got in the middle there. And you can see here on chromosome 16, we've got this match that goes into our zone a bit, but it's not really much. Is this a recombination point here? I'm not sure. So this particular match, this Hobbs match, is on the Esther Taylor side. And so it's not matching us. And it is sort of ends here and starts there. Now, Christine and Pam will get their autosomal DNA from either the Ray side, which we're not interested in, or the Williams or Taylor. And so it's not likely to be Ray for us. So these are our segments down here, the blue ones. So is this John Williams? Is this the end of Esther Taylor in that segment area, and is this John Williams, or is this just John Williams? Is this Esther Taylor? And this particular match has just stopped there in terms of their allocation. So I need to look into that a lot more. But hopefully that will give me some clues. And to continue to map George's segments, to get to the magic number of 1,500, I haven't quite worked out what I'm up to, but I know it's not 1,500. And I'm using Borland genetics to try and recreate that. I've documented my reconstruction workflow. And as I said earlier, it's a 14-step process. So it's very detailed in terms of looking at all the different places that can help you. And as Jim said earlier, lots of tree building. I've built so many trees, it's not funny. My tree's growing rapidly every day, but it's all good fun. And finally, just this is my George Courtney board. This is my Christmas innovation to start to put a lot of this stuff visually behind me, so I can just refer to the board and put up here little notes on triangulated groups. The blue ones are Courtney's, the green ones are Courtney Pace, and the pink ones are just things I'm not quite sure about. And putting up the key trees, so I can just turn around and have a look at it if I'm interested in how someone fits in. So over to you. What would you try next? Have anyone got any ideas or alternative approaches that I could take? I hope to be back with you one day with a solution.